Mad honey is a special type of honey that contains a class of drugs known as granutoxins. Those substances are responsible for the alleged recreational effects as well as legitimate poisoning. People have used this kind of honey for thousands of years, including as a biological weapon, as a medicine, and as a drug. Granutoxins come from plants in the Ericaceae family, particularly some members of the rhododendron genus. Bees feed on the plants, and the drugs end up integrated into the honey. Although the poisons are produced in plants around the world, Turkey and Nepal see the most mad honey use. If you want to learn more about the science and the safety of the drug, I have a video on that topic linked in the description. Perhaps the first reliable reference to mad honey's use came from Xenophon, a Greek soldier and historian in 401 BC. In his Anabasis, Xenophon described how his troops were poisoned by honey from rhododendron ponticum flowers. He was leading 10,000 soldiers back from the Battle of Cunexa against the Grand Persian army. During their journey, they ended up in the Turkish province of Trabzon, an area whose only distinguishing quality was its abundance of honey and bees. Many soldiers ate the honey. Those who had a lot went off their heads and were like mad people. Those who took less acted like they were drunk and vomited. None of the soldiers could stand up. There were numbers of them lying on the ground as though after a defeat, and there was a general state of despondency. However, they were all alive on the next day and came to themselves at about the same hour as they had eaten the honey the day before. It took 3 to 4 days for them to return to normal. At least since the 5th century BC, humans have known about the symptoms of mad honey poisoning. Nausea, vomiting, drowsiness, weakness, and drunkenness are common symptoms. People are usually fine within a day, but sometimes the poisoning lasts longer or is fatal. Although it's been described as hallucinogenic, there's not much support for this in the ancient or modern literature. It sometimes offers effects like those from alcohol or cannabis, but it's quite different from LSD, psilocin, and other psychedelics. However, it's possible other honeys have been responsible for hallucinogenic effects. We know, for example, that honey can contain tropane alkaloids from plants in the Solanaceae family. Those drugs, such as scopolamine and hyoscyamine, can cause delirious hallucinations and even death when a lot is used. Granutoxins, on the other hand, don't appear hallucinogenic. Before Xenophon's troops ate themselves into a stupor, the honey may have been used by oracles, including Pythia at Delphi. Greek and Roman literature suggest honey may have played a role in the religious practices of ancient Greece, though it should be noted there are multiple theories regarding oracles in that region. Sometime around the 600s and 500s BC, the Homeric hymn to Hermes described mysterious bee oracles, or melisae. Pythia, aka the oracle at Delphi, was also described as a bee oracle. The melisae were young women who revealed the future, reportedly while under the influence of maddening fresh honey. Supposedly, they lived under the cliffs of Mount Parnassus. They fed on melichloron, foods of the gods. Divinely maddened, they are inspired to speak the truth, but if they are deprived of the divine honeycomb, they cannot prophesy. One interpretation says chloron is nothing more than a metaphor or a reference to ordinary mead, but it could mean green as in fresh. Green could therefore refer to unripe, uncapped spring honey, which is believed to have more granutoxins. The hymn also likens the raving of the bee oracles to the frenzy of the Maenads, Dionysus's female followers. In the 5th century BC, Euripides, a Greek playwright, also spoke of the Maenads. They would wave wands flowing with honey and drink an intoxicating mixture of honey and alcohol. While maddened, Euripides claimed they could tell the future, much like the bee oracles. Later, in the 2nd century AD, Plutarch described an incident where Pythia became dreadfully disordered and began shrieking, collapsed, and died. We don't know the cause of her death, but a hypothetical cause is whatever drug the oracle was using. While there are other explanations for the oracle's behavior, we have a few lines of evidence supporting intentional drug use in ancient Greece. Outside of mad honey, the Eleusinian mysteries of ancient Greece could have involved the ritualistic use of psychedelics, but again, multiple theories have been proposed. Even earlier, around the 8th and 7th centuries BC, Homer and other early Greek writers discussed how people would collect honey from wild bees' nests located between rocks and in hollow trees. Honey collection, possibly including mad honey, is a long-standing practice. practice. One of the early mentions of its medical use is found in works from Aelian, a Roman author around the 3rd century AD. The Geoponica, a 10th century collection of ancient texts, also discussed how the honey could be used. Some of the earliest descriptions of its effects came from individuals like Dioscorides and Pliny the Elder. In the 1st century, Dioscorides talked about honey produced in Heraclea of Pontus, an eastern Black Sea region of Turkey. Rubbed on with caustic, it heals sunburn, and with salt, it takes away bruises, he wrote. If someone was poisoned, he recommended eating rue and salt meat and drinking mead, taking these as often as they vomit. Pliny also discussed the substance in the 1st century. He was one of the most famous ancient naturalists, and he wrote about mad honey in Naturalis Historia. Pliny talked about Mediterranean honeys, but he warned about the qualities of Melimenomenon, otherwise known as mad or raving honey, from the Black Sea coast. He attributed its toxicity to rhododendrons and azaleas. As we now know, rhododendrons are indeed a source of granotoxins. In the country of Sana'i, located on the shore of Turkey's Black Sea coast, there is another type of honey causing madness. It is called Minomenon. This poison is generally related with the rhododendron flower, which exists in thick forests. Although people here pay a tax to the Romans for it, they cannot gain any income from this honey because of its very harmful effects. Indeed, the food of bees is so important that it may be poisonous for us. In Pontus, different honeys from the same bees may be fatal after a few years, and a poisonous honey has a dense appearance and an abnormally red color, and its smell causes sneezing. However, it is much more effective than a similar good quality honey. Supposedly, it did have some useful applications. Taken in wine, it is a remedy for indispositions caused by eating fish, and there is nothing better than this honey mixed with costus for softening the skin of females, or combined with aloes for the treatment of bruises. Like Dioscorides, Pliny also gave a treatment for poisonings. Old honeyed wine is good, mixed with the finest honey and rue. Salt meats also taken repeatedly in small quantities and as often brought up again. Later, the pseudo-Aristotle documents, which were attributed to Aristotle but often came from much more recent people, talked about mad honey. At Trapezus in Pontus, honey from boxwood has a heavy scent, and they say that healthy men go mad, but that epileptics are cured by it immediately. Trapezus refers to Trabzon, the same part of Turkey mentioned by other writers. It seems reasonable to suggest the writer was talking about mad honey. Some people have referred to it as one of the first biological weapons. There are records of it being used as far back as the before Christ era. In 67 BC, the armies of Pompey were attacked in northern Anatolia, a region in Turkey, by King Mithridates of Pontus. Based on the advice of a counselor, Mithridates ordered combs of mad honey be placed in the path of the advancing Romans. The Romans who ate the honey collapsed with fatigue and were easy to overcome. Strabo described the situation. The Heptacomedes destroyed 3 Roman detachments belonging to Pompey as they passed over the mountainous country. They placed mad honey obtained from the boughs of trees into bowls and left those on the road. When Roman troops ate the honey and lost consciousness, they attacked easily and disposed of them all. Hundreds of years later, the Russian queen, Olga of Kiev, staged an elaborate funeral for her husband, the Grand Duke Igor. Igor had been murdered by the Drevlians, a tribe that was often opposed to the Kievan Rus and refused to pay tribute. When Igor was killed, a scornful Olga waged a murderous campaign against the Drevlians, all while tricking them. She invited many of her enemies to a funeral feast for her husband. They were given mad honey and alcohol. Once they were affected by the drug, 5,000 guests were burned to death by Olga's allies. Another instance of military use occurred in a similar region in 1489. Russian soldiers, being pursued by Tatars, abandoned their camp, but they left ample amounts of mad honey mead behind. When the Tatars reached the camp, they drank the mad honey. Once they had gotten themselves into a stupor, the Russians returned and ruthlessly slaughtered them. Delibal, a local Turkish name for mad honey, was a major Black Sea export by the 1700s. 25 tons of toxic honey, known in the West as milföy or crazy honey, were shipped each year to Europe. The The honey was then added to drinks sold in taverns. In the early 1700s, Joseph de Tournefort, a French botanist, was traveling in the Black Sea region. He described poisonous honey originating from Azalea pontica, now known as Rhododendron luteum. Whoever eats of this honey becomes intoxicated, he wrote. There were cases of poisoning even in North America by the 1700s. For example, it was sold in New Jersey to potentiate alcohol, but that sometimes led to dangerous effects. In 1794, Benjamin Smith Barton, an American physician and botanist, became the first to potentially describe the effects of mad honey poisoning in the US. He presented his findings during a meeting of American philosophers in 1794 and published his work in 1802. He described a 54-year-old female who may have taken mad honey. However, some of her symptoms, such as visual hallucinations, could have come from other kinds of toxic honey. But many people have claimed the Barton case involved granotoxin honey. Barton also described how Pennsylvania beekeepers would become inebriated to a great degree from mountain laurel honey, and people would turn a profit by adding honey to liquor and selling the mix in New Jersey under the name methylglyn. Barton says the effects would initially be pleasant, but they could become ferocious. J. Gramer, a former Confederate surgeon, wrote about the South's encounters with mad honey in Gleanings in Bee Culture in 1875. He spoke of numerous incidents in which Southern soldiers were poisoned. The effects he described fit with other descriptions of granotoxin poisoning. First, it caused a queerish sensation of tingling all over. Blurry vision would then develop. And finally, there'd be an empty, dizzy feeling about the head and a horrible nausea. Soldiers could be entirely overpowered and dead drunk from the honey, though they'd normally be fine within 2 to 3 days. Gramer noted, however, that fatal consequences have been known to follow a too-free indulgence. In 1891, P.C. Plug, a German scientist, conducted a study of several Ericaceae plants and discovered granotoxin was the active drug. It was referred to as andromedotoxin in the research, and it had been found in honey from the Trabzon area of Turkey. He published a paper on the topic in 1899 and described mad honey poisoning. One of the first case series in the US came from Keebler in 1896. He presented his findings at a meeting of the American Pharmacists Union. Keebler talked about 8 cases of poisoning in New Jersey, and he also referred to an earlier series from Coleman in 1853. That report documented 13 cases in New Jersey, including 1 fatality, as well as 20 other cases in South Carolina, including 3 fatalities. Even though there was a pretty extensive history of poisoning by the 1900s, the 1929 Encyclopedia Britannica doubted the existence of mad honey. In all likelihood, the symptoms described by these old writers were due to overeating or to eating honey on an empty stomach. During the 1900s, people in the West also wrote about their encounters with the honey in other areas. George Sheriff, a Scottish plant hunter, was in southeast Tibet in 1947. He was joined by his friends Ludlow and Eliot, both of whom purchased some wild honey from the natives. Ludlow describes in Harold Fletcher's A Quest of Flowers how he felt cold and giddy and had a curious numbing pain in the back of my neck and could neither see nor write properly. Eventually he collapsed, though both had recovered by the next morning. When a Nepali cook tried the honey, he also became very ill. In 1956, British novelist Rose Macaulay published her most popular work, The Towers of Trebizond, a part fantasy, part autobiography memoir. In it, she recounts a trip through Turkey. A Greek friend named Xenophon at one point introduces her to a local delicacy of azalea blossoms and yogurt. She then sets off with her camel as May breezes blowed. Her travels continue as she eats flowers of lush rhododendrons. A sorcerer then gives her a green potion, described as a strong, sweet elixir, more marvelous than mere wine. Feeling dizzy and strange after 3 sips, she stops to rest in a mossy glade. She falls into a coma and has an enchanting hallucinatory dream, imagining she wandered in the woods, eating azalea honey. During the rest of her novel, she constantly takes mad honey and falls into trances, while her camel also eats azalea pontica. At the end of her long journey, she vows to return to Trebizond one day to lay in a good stock of the stuff. With more Americans potentially being exposed to mad honey by the late 1900s, Kenneth Lamp of the American Medical Association warned against using foreign honeys. He said consumers seeking exotic tastes of imported honey could be exposed to toxic, unprocessed wild honey, and this would especially be an issue when the honey came from farmers who have only a few hives. According to the AMA, cases of mad honey poisoning should be anticipated everywhere, considering the global reach of mad honey. As of the 2000s, we are now hundreds of years into mad honey being exported from Turkey and Nepal. With the help of the internet, some people have found it easier to access, though it's often fairly expensive. It's been promoted as both a fun, interesting drug and as a natural medicine for various ailments. Even in South Korea, imports increased during the 2000s, rising from 806 kilograms in 2003 to 7,242 kilograms 1 year later. Research has found rhododendron honey could have antioxidant and antimicrobial effects, though more research is needed, and the benefits are likely to vary between batches. Given the many alternative sources of antioxidants, there seems to be little reason to use mad honey for those reasons right now. While plant species containing granotoxins occur globally, honey affected by those toxins is rare once you get out of Turkey and Nepal. Typically, honeybees produce honey that's non-toxic for a couple reasons. First, they primarily gather nectar from non-toxic sources, or they may use multiple nectar sources, leading to a low concentration of the toxins. Commercial honey has effectively no risk of containing granotoxins due to the way it's produced and prepared. I want to talk a little more about Turkey's history with mad honey. As was already mentioned, many of the ancient discussions of granotoxin honey involved batches coming from the Black Sea region. Therefore, it's been used in Turkey for thousands of years. Ava Crane, a British beekeeping expert and one of the most important people in the field, discussed Turkey's connection to honey. Crane believes the earliest managed hives in northern Turkey were likely wild nests in tree cavities that had artificially enlarged openings to enable more efficient honey collection. Ropes were used to reach hives in high branches, a practice also mentioned by Strabo. At some point, hollow logs with removable tops were also set on the ground or in trees to attract bees. Mad honey is also frequently called bitter honey in Turkey due to its distinct taste and ability to cause a burning sensation in the throat. Locally, rhododendrons are known to be dangerous to animals, so they've been called things like goatbane, lamb kill, cattle destroyer, and horse killer. Traditionally, mad honey is used for diabetes, bowel disorders, hypertension, abdominal pain, and sexual dysfunction. A small survey in 2009 found the honey was most often used for sexual reasons by middle-aged beekeepers in Turkey. It's also sometimes used recreationally, including as a mixture with alcohol. David Leach, a horticultural historian, says people in the Caucasus have added small quantities of Pontic azalea honey to alcoholic drinks to intensify the effect, and it may also be combined with milk. Because actual poisoning is known to be an issue, methods for reducing toxicity have been used. When people in Pontus wanted to use more, they'd boil the honey either alone or mixed with hazelnuts, branches of fig trees, onion, sour apples, quinces, or milk. They'd also store it for long periods, ranging from 6 months to 5 years, to potentially reduce its toxicity. And sometimes they'd cut off the flowers of R. ponticum and R. luteum in early spring to limit the amount of nectar bees could receive from those plants. Some of the traditional remedies for poisoning have included head wetting with warm or cold water, bathing in a river or the sea. In regions such as Zonguldak, patients are showered and a mix of ash with mud is put on their head. Purgatives and vomiting are also recommended, so people may drink vinegar and warm beverages or eat garlic, egg whites, and yogurt. As David Leach has noted, whether intoxication, painkiller, or deadly poison depends on the size of the dose. One of the contributing factors to mad honey poisoning is that each serving of honey can contain different amounts of granotoxins. Dioscorides wrote in the 1st century AD that honey was only a problem in certain seasons. Over time, most people have found poisonings tend to occur in the spring, often in the early part of the season. Ancient Greek and Roman writers associated toxic honey with early spring, calling it maddening fresh honey. In a 1929 Bee World article, a beekeeper in the region described the persistent poison honey problem. From his experience, dry spells at high elevations produce the most dangerous honey. A single honeycomb could contain both lethal and good honey. Even though people are aware of the dangers, use continues in Turkey, and mad honey is one of the more common sources of food poisoning. Yet they do recognize recognize the importance of dose. 1 teaspoon or so may be used for things like stomachache, while higher doses are known to cause intoxication, and even higher doses can be deadly. The most extensive mad honey history is in Turkey, yet Nepal also has a long-running connection to granotoxins. The practice of honey hunting is particularly popular among the Gurung. They climb rope ladders while carrying bamboo sticks and reciting mantras to calm the bees. While positioned on rope ladders, they must maneuver large honeycombs into baskets and send those baskets to others in the group. Sometimes they'll test the honey to see if it's toxic. If they grab some in their palm and experience tingling, that's considered a sign of toxicity. Like in Turkey, they use the honey for multiple reasons, both medically and recreationally. Mad honey doesn't have a strong history outside of Turkey and Nepal, but plants around the world also produce granotoxins and have been used medicinally and recreationally. Species containing the toxins are found in North America, Japan, Europe, and Brazil, among other locations. Those in the United States include Calamia latifolia, Calamia angustifolia, Rhododendron occidental, Rhododendron macrophyllum, and Rhododendron albiflorum. Like in other countries, American honey is considered more likely to be toxic in the spring. John Ambrose, a North Carolina beekeeper, once said honeybees will typically bypass Ericaceae plants in favor of those with a higher sugar content and more nectar. But rhododendrons are early bloomers, so in some areas they can become a dominant nectar source. Historically, the first honey of the season has sometimes been toxic. It seems to be most toxic if the honey is green or unripe, just like was suggested in ancient texts. That honey is found in cells that have yet to be capped with wax, which could explain mad honey's sometimes watery consistency and the claim that only some parts of a honeycomb may be toxic. Research in the 1900s confirmed the presence of granotoxins in North American plants, particularly K. latifolia and K. angustifolia. Some Canadian plants also contain the toxins, and certain native groups have historically used rhododendrons for medical reasons, though it's not known if they all contain granotoxins. Rhododendron albiflorum was used by the Okanagan and Skokomish for GI disorders, swelling, and sore throat. According to Benjamin Barton, K. latifolia was used by some native people as a drug, and the Inuit, Cree, and Cherokee have a history of rhododendron, but not necessarily granotoxin use. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments. You can also email me with questions. The Drug Classroom is exclusively funded by donations. People like you make TDC possible. If you want to support, please do so on Patreon.